I turned 60 this year, and the strangest part wasn't the number. It wasn't the sore knees or the way my eyes suddenly demanded more light to do the same things they used to do in dim rooms. It wasn't even the little jokes people make, the ones they think are harmless, about senior discounts and finally slowing down. The strangest part was realizing how much I still feel, how much I still carry, and how little of it ever makes it out of my mouth. People assume something happens as you age, that your emotions mellow out, that the sharp edges smooth down, that life becomes simpler because you've seen it all. They think you stop wanting so much. They think you stop hurting so much. They think you stop missing people so much. But I'll tell you the truth quietly, the way I've lived most of my life. The feelings don't go away. You just get better at hiding them. Sometimes you get so good, you convince yourself they're not even there. If you met me in public, you'd probably describe me as steady, dependable, the type who shows up early and leaves the place cleaner than I found it. I've had neighbors wave to me for years without ever really knowing me. I've had coworkers tell me they admire how calm I am under pressure. I've had family members lean on me like I'm made of something solid and unbreakable, and I let them. Because somewhere along the way, I learned that being the strong one gets you praised. It gets you trusted. It gets you invited to the table. But it also gets you trapped. It gives people a version of you they can count on, while the real you, the one that still wakes up at night with old memories pressing on the chest like a hand, stays hidden behind polite conversation and forced laughter, and I'm fine. I grew up in a house where emotions were treated like clutter, the kind of thing you kept out of sight when company came over. My parents weren't cruel people, not in the obvious ways. They fed us, they worked. They kept the lights on most of the time. But there was an unspoken rule in our home. You didn't make things harder by having feelings out loud. If I cried, I got told I was being dramatic. If I was angry, I got told to watch my tone. If I looked disappointed, I got told to be grateful for what I had. So I learned early how to swallow things. I learned how to nod and say, okay, even when my insides felt like they were cracking. And that skill followed me everywhere. In school, I was the kid who didn't cause trouble. In my 20s, I was the friend who listened more than I talked. In my 30s and 40s, I was the spouse and parent who handled the bills, fixed the leaky faucet, made the calls nobody else wanted to make. I became good at being necessary, and being necessary can feel a lot like being loved. Until the quiet hits. It's funny what quiet does to you when you get older. When you're younger, quiet can feel like freedom, peace, a break from the noise. But at 60, quiet has a way of turning into a mirror. You hear your own thoughts more clearly. You remember things you thought you'd buried. You feel the weight of all the words you never said, and the years you spent trying to be the version of yourself that caused the least trouble for other people. There are mornings now when I wake up and I just lie there. I don't even reach for my phone right away. I stare at the ceiling and I feel this ache that isn't exactly sadness, but it isn't nothing either. It's like my life is full, and still, there are empty rooms inside me I never let anyone walk into. I didn't start noticing it until my kids grew up. When you're raising children, there's always something to do. Someone needs something. Someone's hungry. Someone forgot their homework. Someone needs a ride. Someone is sick. Someone is worried. You become a moving target of responsibility. And I don't say that bitterly. I loved being needed. It gave my life structure. It gave me a reason to keep my feelings packed away neatly, like winter coats in a closet. But then one day you look around and the house is quieter. The bedrooms don't have the same noise. The fridge doesn't empty out as fast. The calendar stops being a battlefield of events and obligations, and you finally have time to sit down with yourself. That's when I realized something I didn't expect. I still had grief in me, not fresh grief, not the kind that makes people bring casseroles and send sympathy cards. Older grief, the quiet kind. The grief people assume you've already moved on from because it happened decades ago. There are people I miss who I never talk about anymore, not because they weren't important, but because after a certain amount of time, The world gets uncomfortable with your longing. People want neat endings. They want recovery stories. They want you to say, "I'm okay now," so they can stop imagining the pain. But I've learned that missing someone isn't always a wound you heal. Sometimes it's a scar you live with, and you touch it on rainy days without meaning to. I think about my father more now than I did when he was alive. Isn't that something? We didn't have a warm relationship. He wasn't the kind of man who hugged. His love was practical. If he cared, he showed it by working overtime, by fixing the car, by making sure the lawn was cut like the neighbors. He rarely said he was proud of me, and I spent years pretending I didn't need him to. But I did. I needed him to look at me and see me, not just as a responsibility, not just as a child to raise, but as a person. I needed him to say, "I know you're trying. I know you're scared sometimes. I know you feel things." But men like him didn't speak that language. So when he died, I did what I always did. I stayed composed. I handled the funeral details. I thanked people for coming. I held my mother up. I stood there like a pillar. And later, when everyone went home, I sat in my car alone and I put my hands on the steering wheel and I couldn't breathe for a minute. Not because I was overwhelmed with dramatic sadness, but because something in me realized it would never happen now. The conversation I always hoped might happen someday. The one where he softened and I got to feel like his child, not his project, was gone. Permanently. I've never told anyone that part. Not really. I don't like admitting I wanted something from him. Wanting feels vulnerable. Wanting makes you sound like you weren't strong enough. But I was strong. I was strong in the way people applaud. I was strong in the way that keeps life running. I was strong in the way that makes everyone else comfortable. And inside, I was still a kid waiting to be understood. That's one of the things I still feel at 60. The younger versions of me are still in here. They didn't disappear. They didn't graduate into some polished, finished adult. They just got quieter. There's also love I never fully spoke out loud. I've been married a long time. Long enough to know that love isn't always candles and vacations and dramatic declarations. Most of it is small things. Coffee made the way the other person likes it. The steady rhythm of sharing a home. Arguing about the thermostat and making up the next day. Sitting in the same room doing different things and still feeling connected. But there's a kind of emotional honesty I didn't always bring into my marriage. Not because I didn't care. Not because I didn't love deeply, but because I didn't know how to say what I felt without feeling exposed. Sometimes I look back at the years when my spouse and I were both exhausted, both busy, both trying to build a life. We did a lot of surviving, we did a lot of teamwork, and we did less tenderness than we should have. And here's the part I don't usually say. There were times I was lonely while standing right next to the person I loved. Not because they abandoned me. Not because they were cruel, but because I didn't know how to open my mouth and say, "I need you to see me right now." Not the problem solver, not the responsible one, just me. I didn't say it, so I carried it. And I don't blame anyone for that. I really don't. It's just the truth. The kind of truth that sits inside you until you get older and you realize time has been moving whether you were honest or not. There's regret in that too. Not the dramatic kind that makes you want to rewrite your whole life, but the quieter kind that makes you want to do better while you still can. Because at 60, you start thinking about, while I still can, while I still have the energy, while I still have time, while I still have people around me, while the phone can still ring, and it isn't too late yet. I've lost friendships that faded slowly like old photographs. Not because we fought, not because someone betrayed someone, just life, kids, jobs, moves, time zones, different seasons. And suddenly the person you used to talk to every week becomes someone you see once every few years, and you act like it doesn't hurt. But it does. There are names I still think about. People I wonder about when I'm driving at night and the radio is low. People I wish I'd been braver with. People I wish I'd thanked properly. People I wish I'd called more often. People I miss in a way that doesn't have a place to land because there's no funeral, no goodbye, no closure, just distance. Another thing I still feel at 60 is anger I never spent. I was taught that anger was dangerous, that it made you difficult, that it made you ungrateful, that it made you the problem. So I learned to keep mine tucked away. I learned to smooth things over. I learned to make peace even when I was the one being hurt. But stored anger doesn't vanish. It hardens. It becomes something like tension in your shoulders. It becomes headaches. It becomes impatience with the people you love because you're tired of being the calm one. There were things that happened to me that shouldn't have happened. Things that weren't catastrophic enough for the movies, but were painful enough to shape me. People who used my kindness as a doorway. People who took more than they gave. People who made me feel small, and I let them because I wanted to be easy to be around. Sometimes I want to go back to those moments and put a hand on my younger self's shoulder and say, "You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to take up space." I didn't know that then. I know it now. But even knowing it now doesn't automatically make it easy. Because when you spend decades being the person who doesn't make a fuss, you start to feel guilty the minute you ask for anything. At 60, I still feel fear sometimes. Not the fear of horror movies or dark alleys. A quieter fear. The kind that shows up when the doctor says, "Let's run a few more tests." The kind that shows up when you realize your parents are gone or getting older and you're next in line for that part of life. The kind that shows up when you think about retirement and wonder if you did enough, saved enough, planned enough. The kind of fear that sits behind your smile at family gatherings because you don't want to burden anyone with your worries. I've sat at kitchen tables, looking at paperwork, pretending I'm calm, while my mind runs through worst-case scenarios like it's trying to protect me by rehearsing disaster. And I've learned something about fear at this age. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you still care. It means you still have things you don't want to lose. Because here's the truth. Nobody really says out loud, aging doesn't make you numb. If anything, it can make you more tender, more aware, more conscious of what matters. And that tenderness can hurt. I feel joy too. Real joy. Not the loud kind, not always, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. I feel joy when I'm in the grocery store and I hear a kid laughing in the next aisle and it reminds me of when my own kids were small. I feel joy when the sun hits my living room floor just right in the late afternoon. I feel joy when someone I love texts me for no reason except to share something silly. I feel joy when I realize I made it through things I didn't think I'd survive. And sometimes that joy makes me emotional because it's mixed with gratitude and grief at the same time, like a song that's beautiful and painful in the same breath. There's a moment that really hit me not long ago. I was at a family gathering, one of those casual get-togethers where people are eating off paper plates, kids are running around, someone's standing by the grill like it's their whole identity for the afternoon. I was sitting in a folding chair, watching everyone talk over each other, laughing, carrying on. And somebody asked me, "How you doing?" I smiled. I said, "Good, can't complain." And that was the acceptable answer. That was the answer that kept the day moving. But inside, there was a whole other answer. Inside, I was thinking, "I'm grateful, but I'm tired." Inside, I was thinking, "I love all of you, but sometimes I feel invisible." Inside, I was thinking, "I wish someone would ask me the real question and stay long enough to hear the real answer." I didn't say any of that. I just took another sip of my drink and watched the conversation move on without me. Later that night, after everyone went home, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off except for the glow from the microwave clock, and I felt something tight in my chest. Not sadness exactly, just the feeling of being a full human being with a whole lifetime inside you, and realizing that most people only ever see the surface. And maybe that's partly my fault. Because I trained them, I taught them I was fine. I taught them I didn't need much. I taught them I could handle it. So here I am at 60, still feeling things I don't always talk about. I still feel love that scares me because it's so deep. I still feel grief that shows up when I smell someone's cologne in a passing crowd. I still feel regret for the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I still feel pride that I don't know how to express without sounding like I'm bragging. I still feel the ache of missing the people I used to be. But I also feel something new now. Something I didn't have in my 20s or even my 40s. I feel a kind of permission. Not the loud permission people post online. Not the reinvent yourself permission. Something softer than that. It's the permission to be honest with myself, to admit that I'm not finished, to admit that I still have wounds and dreams and fears and tenderness, to admit that I still want connection and I still want to be understood and I still want to say the things that matter before time makes the decision for me. So lately, I've been practicing little acts of truth. I tell my spouse, I miss you, even if we're just in the next room. I tell my kids I'm proud of you, not because they achieved something impressive, but because I see who they are. I call an old friend when I think of them instead of assuming they're too busy. I let myself say, that hurt when something hurts, instead of brushing it off like it doesn't matter. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I let myself feel everything without rushing to fix it. Because feelings don't always need solutions. Sometimes they just need space. I don't know why it took me so long to understand that. Maybe it's just how we were raised. Maybe it's how life in this country trains you to keep moving, keep working, keep producing, keep smiling. But I'm starting to believe that being human isn't about having it all figured out. It's about being willing to admit what's true. And the truth is, at 60, I still feel deeply. I still feel things I never learned how to say out loud. I still feel the weight of moments that shaped me, even if nobody else remembers them. I still feel the love I've given and the love I didn't know how to receive. I still feel the quiet hope that I'm not too late to be more honest, more present, more real. And maybe, if you're listening to this and you felt something similar, if you've been walking around with your own private ache, your own unspoken emotions, maybe you don't have to carry it all alone either. Maybe it's okay to be the strong one and still have soft places. Maybe it's okay to be grown and still be healing. Maybe it's okay to admit that time doesn't erase what mattered. Because the truth is, the things we don't talk about don't disappear, they just wait. And at 60, I've finally stopped pretending they aren't there.